any questions along the way that may need to occur, that you may have, that we might be able to answer as I'm undertaking the presentation or at the very end. With that, I will continue on. So just a little bit about me before I begin. As mentioned, I've worked in the higher education sector for 20 plus years. I won't tell you how old I am, but you could probably guess that I'm a reasonable age. And I've held quite a number of roles throughout many universities in Australia. A lot of those roles are around supporting research and research administration, things like grant management through to ethics and the like. But it's also been involved with things like development of policies and processes, in particular when it comes to around data and research data and data management. A coined phrase that we like to use in Australia is often we refer to it as e-research. And it's quite a popular term that is used in Australia. So I've certainly been involved with a lot of activities around e-research and the idea of best use of practice and data sharing, setting up repositories for accessing and storing data, linking it to things like publications and the like. And seen over the years the value of data sharing particularly in an open access world that we live in, and wanting to be more collaborative with our research. So that's a little bit about me. I joined Elsevier 7 years ago, just over 7 years ago, and have worked across the APAC region in a variety of roles, selling some of our SaaS solutions in particular. Some of those include things like Pure, digital commons and digital commons data in particular. In a past life, if you might have heard the term Mendeley data, and that was an old term that was used, but it's roughly the same thing when it comes to providing support for institutions and the capacity to build better research. So that's a little bit about me. I guess where I want to start from is at a fairly high level, but it's becoming a very popular trend across the globe, and you will have seen this from time to time, and that is, why does research data matter, and things like that. And we're certainly to see a lot of trends right across from the globe, and one of those being the European Commission, for example, where the whole idea of it's important that there was no opting out on research data management. You know, they must manage their data and be responsible and in line with the FAIR principles. So you're starting to see policy shifts from different parts of the world. So the EU, in this case, will certainly introduce this sort of the idea of policy shifts, where the idea of capturing research data is very important. But it wasn't just happening in places like the EU. Again, closer to home, for me at least, we've got the Australian National Data Service, and there was very much a policy put in place where the National Health and Medical Research Council made it very clear that managing research data and making it publicly available was a great way to considering the reuse of the data, and that you should be able to share the data and any of the metadata that arise from that. And so the NHMRC certainly been an advocate in Australia, and that's led to a number of other of government agencies within Australia that have also saw the increased sort of capture of metadata. But I guess even though there's policies in place and it on the surface seems to look a good idea, does it actually make a difference? And that's probably a question from a number of levels that we can talk about. And the first one of those is what we have noticed traditionally from an Elsevier perspective, that we do find that where there is academic data cited in either the research outputs or linked from the publications. As you know, research goes through effectively 3 phases. Be it collecting data, analysing data, and summation and presenting the data. Now, again, I'm not at all suggesting that the idea that research is very simple. It's very complex, and I fully appreciate that. But when you're looking at a research project, there's always those 3 core phases that the research project often go through. And so when it comes to actually presenting that final result, what we find is that generally that there's at least 25% more cited content from the research outputs where there's reference to the research data inside the publications themselves. And we're seeing this as a trend right across the world. So obviously, I guess there's probably a number of questions that could be drawn from this. And some of those might be around the idea of suggesting that perhaps by doing this, that it makes obviously the research, it can help to validate the research, but it also provides the information directly for others to have a greater appreciation of the type of research that's being conducted, and can do a bit more of a deep dive on the research itself. And so it does tend to increase the value for the researcher and highlight, their profile a lot more when it comes to this type of information. So we do see this as a general trend. Now, of course, as was mentioned in the introduction, we have this suggestion that really we want to have, the idea if we want fair data. We want to meet the guidelines of the requirements for the funders, the relevant funders. And so I made reference to the NHMRC, for example, or the EU, and these are just some of them, cherry picking from across the globe, where the idea of actually, storing, archiving and preserving the research data is so crucial. And it starts to drive a behavioural change within that sort of idea of what we call best practices within institutions, and tends to drive a higher quality around the way research is conducted within institutions and the way researchers collaborate with each other. So it allows for better collaboration as a result of that, because there's you can, as I said, you can do a lot more of a deep dive from just the article itself, but you can actually drill down a lot more, and it starts to show in a longitudinal sense, I guess, the idea of impact and reporting, and starting to show some trends. So what you sometimes see is that the more data that's shared and available, that it tends to have, as I mentioned, a higher citation rate, but also that then can lead to greater collaboration down the track, which in turn leads to greater research outcome, which in turn leads to greater societal outcomes and impact that way. So you're starting to see this real trend that obviously we are getting ready for more of an open data solution moving forward. Now, I recognise not all data, just to be clear, can be made open data. There are some times with confidential data, you have to be very careful with personal data. You might be conducting very private research. But the idea of advertising that you have that data from a metadata perspective is equally important, even if the data cannot be directly shared automatically. So that is something that we need to sort of work towards into the future. So what we're starting to see is that obviously the greater the impact, the idea is that it creates fair data, and it starts to lead to these sort of collaborations. So what we're seeing, particularly in digital commons data, one of our solutions, that it's a way of publishing your data. Being fair, obviously, that means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it's, as I mentioned, it's more likely to be cited and reused many times. Things that help making the data available are things like persistent identifiers on the data. And we're starting to see a real trend of that in Australia, that minted DOIs are now becoming digital object identifiers, are now becoming more of a practice in Australia. And I could start to see moving forward that we'll start to see that more of a global uptake. So similarly to what you see for outputs where you have a DOI, I can't see why you wouldn't in the future start to see a lot more data sets that will have this persistent identifier available. And then obviously systems would be in place to support and always redirect people back to wherever that data set is held at the time, or the metadata relating to that data set. Obviously from a digital digital commons data perspective, you're starting to see the capacity where you start to see, you know, the need for versioning and changing. Sometimes data sets are published and they might need to be republished or updated. There's a way of sort of managing that within these type of systems, which help for that greater collaboration and teamwork throughout the life cycle of the research itself, as well as that final published version. But it also is a way of linking to things like ORCID ID, and the like. And having descriptive metadata is probably key to all of this. And this is something that I personally have witnessed that some people are very good at it. And I think it's an area of training that probably needs a specific topic in its own right. There's a lot of standard material that's placed around the metadata itself, but I'm going to give you an example in just a little while where even some of the metadata that was stored isn't necessarily as valuable as it could be. It's important to obviously have the relevant links where it's possible to maybe the final outputs and things like that. And then what you want to do is have the relevant open access licenses associated, whether it is open access or not. Maybe the relevant standard, Creative Commons license, potentially, things like that. Or if it's marked private, again, it's really important to actually still highlight the fact that you have that data set. And it's something that's very crucial to do. Once you've got that type of material stored in like digital commons data, it's then obviously available to be searchable by things like Google dataset search. So we work very closely with Google to make sure that our solution allows you to index and to link appropriately. It links to DataCite as well, and OpenAIR. Again, these are platforms designed just for showcasing and highlighting data. What you sometimes find, just with general, I'll make the comment that is the case where you might have discipline-specific data sets, data locations. And that's an important point where you'll actually want to ensure that people are publishing their data in the right discipline-specific location. An example of that is things like astronomy, for example. There's often a lot of this content that's stored very centrally, but again, the metadata can be made available and with a reference link to where the data is stored. It may not be stored inside an own institutional repository in this case, but it could be linked out to a third-party repository as needed. Obviously, from when it comes to publishing that, there might be the need for particular custom data that's available. And I mentioned about the idea of padding out these metadata records. So digital commons data allows for that need where you actually want to make it more discoverable, make it a lot easier to find. I can recall many years ago where I worked at a particular university, and someone had cited their work by the building number in which they worked and the street on which they lived, where the building was. They didn't actually cite the university at all. So citing and referencing this information and having the metadata correctly is a great, highlights the importance of making sure that people are aware of the data that's been captured, the great research that's been conducted at universities. And you can start to add additional data sets as you need to. So for example, here you might want to include things like a campus, for example, or where the data is stored, or relevant data that might be related to the funder itself, or the grant ID, things like that. Again, some of these things may or may not be made public at the end of the day, but it's about linking the data together so that you sort of have that sort of research that's being conducted that leads to some sort of data that's being collected, that leads to a research paper that's being published, that is also then stored with the research data. A research outputs that is published based off the research data, which obviously is linked back together. And potentially, again, it then could be linked to a piece of equipment that's produced that data, depending on the discipline that you're involved with. So these are the type of things that need to be considered when you're starting to manage the data and capturing it inside digital commons data. The other thing you might need to consider is about the curation process. So not all data, when you key it in immediately, is maybe ready to be available to be made public. So there's the opportunity to review, to double check that all the information's there, that the metadata meets the policy standards of the various institutions, for example. Have you named everyone? Do you have the rights for the data? Have you signed off on the approval processes? There might be some needs to actually sort of monitor and manage that data and sort of share it back and forth with the researcher to validate. Do you have the approval of the other researchers from third-party institutions to actually store that data and things like that? So all of these type of procedural questions come into from administrative sense, which are really important to maintaining the credibility of the research, the credibility of the organisation, and at the end of the day, highlighting that data set and making it available. So the idea to make it sort of set correctly with all the relevant metadata so that it is published correctly, so it can be found. I referred a minute ago to the example where I made reference to the university that I worked, that they put down the building number and the road that they worked on. Again, that's not a great advertisement for the university concerned. And so that needed that sort of data quality cleanup before it was fully published. There's also the need, as I touched on earlier, is about confidential data sets. And so sometimes, you can't publish the data set. As I said earlier, from privacy perspectives, there might be the need to manage how people get access to that, to request access to the data. And so Mendeley data allows you to do this. Again, the key point here is that you would publish the metadata on all of your research data sets that you've had. And then what you would do is make sure that you actually, so that it's still searchable by Google and these other data indexes that exist around the world, DataCite, etc. But again, if you need to, you can actually make the data set private, and you could contact the researcher or the institution to gain access for that data. And then agreements can be put in place. Maybe there's legal agreements that need to be signed. Maybe it's an opportunity for greater collaboration with that existing researcher and yourself to use that data and to extend that research for another purpose. And so that's always a great example where that sort of collaboration of sharing that data, I think the value of the research data is much higher in a lot of ways than the research paper that is often has been produced for many years. It highlights, a summary of the work that's being conducted, and there might be key findings in the research paper. But often people would still want to revalidate that or look at it through a different lens. So getting access to the data, be it private or public, is really quite crucial. But Mendeley data allows for you to do this. You can obviously, using Mendeley data, you also have the Mendeley data, digital commons data. I'm sorry, my brain is not thinking straight. Digital commons data. You can also use digital commons data to highlight some of the other data sets that are available, and you can start to see some of the other data that's available to you. So from things like DataSite, or one of the product that we used to have was Data Monitor, where you could sort of start to highlight, and you can find like data sets from around the world. So it's an important way of capturing a lot of this information, and being able to not only look at that data set, but find relevant and other data sets accordingly. But let's have a look at some of the use cases surrounding this. I think, the key point here is talking about fair data itself. And so the idea of some of the examples that I can think of that I've used with several of our clients is the idea of being able to preserve and showcase research data. I think we've discovered already and discussed already the importance of why you would want to showcase and preserve and to highlight that you do have this research data available to you. But it's really important that this gets shared more broadly. And so an example of that, for example, is the idea that in the National Institute of Standard and Technology in America, that they could start to see that the value of their research was not only in the researchers, the research outputs, but in the research data itself. And it really highlights the importance of undertaking and why you don't want to lose or mismanage that research data. Often many dollars and a lot of money is spent conducting research, and research costs a lot of money. So the last thing you want to do is lose that research that's the research data that's being conducted, that formed part of that research. You don't want the situation where another researcher might want to come along and want to fund a very similar project and actually undertakes nearly identical research again, where it's better to use the research data that's already in existence, and potentially use that for different purposes. But obviously the need that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they started to realize that it was so important that they, to make sure that they had this data captured centrally. So what they were able to do is they were able to capture all of this type of information, and there were different types of data that they were capturing. Research data isn't just about zeros and ones. I mean, at the end of the day it is, but it's really about different types of information and relevant. It could be, in this case, we're looking at historical documents. It's videos that are being captured. There's 3D imaging, specimens, maps, GIS data and locations, so that you can actually go back to where that data was actually captured. There might be raw data that is captured from a piece of equipment, and the relevant scripts and algorithms that we use to help to capture that raw data. Again, it's certainly the way you're capturing the data. We all know that things can be interpreted very differently. It's important that you get the definitions right. It's important that you're capturing the right information. Again, another story which I guess is relevant to this is we might have a definition of what something is. I remember when I worked at a university many years ago, we had the definition of what an active researcher was. And everyone in the university had a different definition of what an active researcher was. So it just goes to show about the human psyche, about what you think you understand about a particular data set, in this case, and maybe some of the results. So the idea of capturing all of the information to make it very clear about the type of equipment, the time of day that the experiment was run, the results that was getting out of the system, how they transpose those results. All of this type of thing is really quite important when you're starting to see the end-to-end process of that research during the collection, between the collection stage, the analysis phase in the middle, which is what this is about, and then the final results being shared at the end. So you really want to maximize the value of the research data. As I said, there's a lot of time, a lot of money that's spent, and you want to make it durable, that it's long-term and available for people into the future. And of course, under these guidelines, we want to make sure that it's published under the FAIR principles overall, to increase the impact, longer impact, to highlight the research that's being conducted, as I said, the increased citation over 25%, and showing your research data, linking it to your research outputs, that there's a correlation, a direct correlation between the two. So that's just one example that they were able to undertake. Another example is where we could potentially manage research data across multiple projects. We know researchers are looking for funding from various sources, but at the end of the day, it's building on research that they're already undertaking. It's not a different research question. It's an extension of what they're asking, or the next part of the journey that they're trying to answer. So quite obviously, from grant to grant, a researcher is having different grants that they're applying for, but at the end of the day, the research and the research data may be linked to multiple grants, multiple research outputs over a period of time. And so the idea of digital commons data allows for that trusted place for you to store that information, to share that data available, and to make it wider available, to validate the research for reproducibility. Just to clarify, if there's anomalies in the research outputs, or sorry, the data points, perhaps they might be wanting to do some revalidation. Was that a fault of the piece of equipment? Was it expected? Was it not expected? Was it seen as noise, data noise? These type of things. So the idea of the reproducibility, to see whether you get similar results where possible, is very important. And so the idea of having a cloud platform that's available to you, in this case, where you can start to link that data together. You can see on the left there in that image that there's various files that you can download, how you can cite that data set for future. It shows the relevant organizations involved, and it shows that research, what the research is that's being conducted. Now, of course, digital commons data requires you to have that data on a platform that is meeting standards. Technology is always changing and evolving. We know this. And so as a result of that, we take a great lot of care at Elsevier to make sure that the platform that the digital commons data is being stored on meets the relevant standards. It's secure, it's accessed in a particular way, and ensures that durability moving forward into preservation with fail-safe activities and the like. Just moving on, the next thing we need to talk about is the challenge of the data itself. I'm very sorry. There's someone just knocking at my door. Please excuse me for 1 second. I do apologize. I'm so sorry about that. Please accept my apologies. That's the upside and the downside of working from home and having a home office. So obviously you can't help but have to deal with the issues that are happening at home, as well as trying to do a presentation that's professional for everybody. Thankfully, my dog isn't barking at the same time. So thank you for bearing with me. But anyway, the challenges, as I was saying, is that you want to make sure that that data is, findable moving forward into the future. A project might last only 5 years. Potentially some of these human studies, the importance of maintaining data and data sets, you need to maintain a lot of data up to 20 years, depending on the various government environments and policies that are around that research being conducted. And if it isn't stored or managed properly, then you can have the situation where you can't actually find that data into the future. And that runs to a real problem that, like we need to know about the data that's been published from papers, but we also need to find that unpublished data, because sometimes there's a lot of data collected where people just don't get the results and expectations they're looking for, and maybe don't highlight or share the results themselves, to sort of say, look, I collected all this data and I didn't get the outcome. And so we have sort of had this quote, that was, that they had a challenge with the finding the project data, where they sort of said projects, need to last for 10 years, but the postdocs, the PhD students and the like, only stay for 2 years. So where's the data of those students? Where are they capturing that? So I've seen many institutions now that have started to introduce policies, not only on submission of things like theses, that you're also meant to update and put the data into relevant repositories and highlight that as part of the thesis submission. So again, that highlights like some of the FAIR principles that you might need to consider, and some of the policy changes that might need to exist at university to actually ensure that you've got that data moving forward. And I've got a great story that I wanted to share with you relating to that. I have what I refer to as the case of the missing data. And Boonsang, the gentleman in the top left-hand, top right-hand corner of my slide here, is sometimes they don't actually, we have this sort of situation where data was captured for a particular PhD. This young researcher at the time, Boonsang, was conducting his research, and I actually worked in his office not long before he retired. And he did his PhD. In his PhD, and this is a great example, he made reference to, as he was collecting the data, he was getting data anomalies. And so he just sort of said, oh, this is weird. I don't quite know what this is. And he basically discarded those data points that he was gathering from the data that he'd been collecting. And this was back in 1973. And so he actually had the situation where they sort of said, oh, well, I don't quite know what this is. And he just made reference to that inside his PhD and in his thesis. And he sort of said, I collected this data and I noticed some data anomalies and I just discarded them. And by the way, that's all he said about it. And here are my results from the rest of the data sets that I've gathered and reported as part of his thesis. He then published his thesis and went on with his life. And as it happened, in 2013, this other academic was then looking at it and happened to come across this guy's thesis and sort of said, oh, you had some data. Dr. Ramsden sort of said, well, I don't quite know, I'd be curious to know what this data was. So he ended up contacting Boonsing at the time, and sort of said, "Hey, could you are you able to help me out? And do you happen to have the data that you captured from 1973?" And as it happened, that this guy was very much a hoarder, and he managed to keep all of his data in the garage. He said, "Yeah, I think I've still got it," and it was in his garage. It was stored inside, and back then, obviously, as you can appreciate, it was reel-to-reel data. So he was able to produce these large tapes with some of the data on it. So then Dr. Remsen had to then go and find a reader to something to read those tapes, which took some time because the equipment was obviously outdated. Everything had moved on, and it really highlighted the value of the data, capturing this. And what it led to was that actually it turned out to be one of the first longitudinal studies as it related to coronary heart disease. So those anomalies which were thrown out in 1973 because it wasn't relevant for the question, that the research question he was asking, was actually really relevant in 2013 for a different research. So it highlights not only that research data can be used in the same field, but it can also be highlighted and used in a separate field, or a slightly an adjacent field, as it were. And so in that sense, it's really highlighted to me, and it's such a good story, because had they not been able to find this data, then you can imagine that he might have started the study in 2013 and not be able to do a longitudinal survey until 2036 or 2040, sometime in the future. And so as you can sort of see, the value of capturing data, the value of documenting it correctly, the value of having that metadata correct, is so crucial to actually highlight the value that the system the value can be brought out of data. So I absolutely love this story. So thank you for bearing with me on that. But obviously, so as a result of that, we want to have the sort of situation where digital commons data provides sort of like a compliant environment where all of these things can come together. So imagine if this type of platform existed back in 1973, as I just mentioned, that the data could have been stored in a central spot. As the data technologies changed, then the readers would have changed. The way the information was accessed could be upgraded or changed, and could be reused into the future. And digital commons data allows you then to create an environment, a collaborative environment, where researchers can work together and can link various data sets and data sources, including their local drives, such as Dropbox or OneDrive or some of these things, or Google Drive, and create these collaborative drives to work across various research groups. Because sometimes your research group that you might be conducting might be involve researchers beyond your own institution. So it's always good that you can have that sort of data linking together, and that overall ownership and shared understanding of the data that's being captured, that's talked about. It also helps with redundancies. Sometimes people get ill. Research can be put on hold, funding can run out, things like that. So referring earlier, you heard the story about where's that data. So during this stage, digital commons data not only would provide a place where you can showcase the end result, but you can also use it as a place where you can actually collaborate in that same platform, so that the information's not lost. So I've touched on a little bit about the power of digital commons data, but I'm just going to go over a few more things and just to summarize a few things. And again, thank you for bearing with me. So obviously, digital commons data, if I was just to go back to words from what we've been saying, allows you a place where you can capture, collaborate, and work together. And it creates a required compliant repository. It helps because it also puts the university in control. It understands where its data assets are, who's actually working together. I've seen cases where when grants are made live, that data spaces are provided to particular groups of people so that there's their collaboration place for that grant so that they're expected to use that once a grant's been awarded and things like that, so that institutions can just have that oversight and a bit of management. I can still remember back in the day where people would say, where do you keep your research data? And people might say, in a locked cupboard in my office. So what's the implications if it's a study on maybe a minority group where there's a social impact as well, where potentially research may have been conducted and that minority group might be thinking that you're undertaking some research to actually solve one of their problems firsthand. So it can create, research can create that sort of local expectation. And then what might happen is that data gets lost and another group has to come in and research that community again. I've certainly seen witness to that as well. So the social impact of not managing your data and the ethics beyond just conducting the research and the people involved, particularly when it's human subjects, is really quite important. By this, digital commons data helps to put the institution to manage that at a central location. What happens if there's a fire in a building? What happens if someone gets sick? What happens if someone loses the key? We've seen this these sort of issues. So the management of research data is really quite important. We put a lot of ownership and emphasis on researchers, and I'm not at all suggesting researchers are looking to mismanage their research data. But things can happen beyond their control. There's big floods here in Australia at the moment on the east coast of Australia. Potentially that could be impacting on some research that's being conducted in those regions right now. So is the data being backed up to the cloud where it's appropriate? There might be the need to adopt a particular data model just to meet your own local needs. You saw the need where you might want to have that sort of idea of capturing maybe a campus location or a building location where some of the information's. But there are slowly standards emerging, international standards, similar to what you see in research outputs, that standards exist, where you're starting to, a lot of these data standards are quite common. What this leads to is if you're starting to use more international standards, it's more likely to be found, it's easier to be indexed. But worst case, there still can be particular fields and things like that to actually capture and manage. And you need to look at those additional needs about managing the data. As I said, you think about managing data during the initial phase of the research that's being conducted versus the research that's been produced at the end and the summary data that's been exposed. So there's lots of different questions around that can be asked and linked together. And so the idea of sort of creating these common practices or best practices is really quite important as we move forward. So how does it work? So obviously you can copy data from large, I've shown you like potentially linking with Dropbox or OneDrive, Google Drive, things like that. So they can be copied into what we refer to as a project. And a project's a bit like the grant that's relevant to the grant. And then you can start to collaborate together. And so the information is captured centrally. there's lots of research going on, there's lots of activity back and forth, and you can start to see the morphing of that data that's as it's being collected and summarized and changes and being ultimately summarized into a research output, arguably, and the supporting data that sits beside that research outputs. And then you can start to ultimately, that final version can be then made public if we wish, or marked as confidential, as I showed earlier. And so that's a big advantage. So why would you want to do this? It gives you a way to collaborate together. It gives you a place to store the data to make sure that it is captured centrally. You can link it with research outputs and things like this, which starts to tell a much richer story. As I said, that sort of leads to impact, research impact, beyond the research that's being conducted. I refer to the example I gave earlier. The data that was captured at 1973 was being reused in 2013 for a very different purpose to what it was originally captured for. And so you can start to see the linkages of those things coming together. You can obviously get some administrative reports and oversight to understand a bit more about the repository itself, the data repository, how it's captured, and engagement and things like that, as well as looking at the preservation and how you're capturing that. Preservation is obviously very important. There are standards around that as well. But then you also need to think, you know, as from the I showed earlier, the type of information is data in a CSV file? Is it in an Excel file? Is it in a zip file? Like, all of these things need to be considered because technology changes over time, and we need to have a way of making sure that it can be revalidated and maybe changed as some of the technology changes over a period of time. As I said, it creates that place where researchers can collaborate together and work on that project. But more importantly, it puts your library in control of the projects and managing the data. We know librarians are the best curators when it comes to managing research outputs, and certainly support for research data sets. Just making sure that it's well looked after, that the data is curated in the right way, that all the checks and balances have been put in place, that the university's been tagged correctly, because it helps Google and some of these indexing engines globally to find that data into the future, because that's what you want to do. You want to not only have the research output, but you want to have the research data available to you. So with that, I bring to the end. So Digital Commons data is part of the Digital Commons suite. It is a solution that we've had in place now for quite a number of years. There's two other sort of sister products that sit under Digital Commons. One of those is Digital Commons Repository and Digital Commons or IR and Digital Commons Publishing, which allows you to actually publish journals and the fact. And with that, I'm going to share, obviously say thank you. Thank you for allowing me to get up and get my parcel at the front door halfway through my presentation. But also I wanted to share with you not only my email address, but I also wanted to share with you my colleague's email address, Priyanka. And Priyanka works very closely in your region. So if, as you know, I'm the regional manager, so Priyanka's part of my team. So I've provided Priyanka's details here as well. So should you have any further questions beyond today, of which I'm happy to answer questions now, but you're more than welcome to reach out to Priyanka. I will be sharing the slides with you from today, so feel free to go through those. I'll send those through, and I hope this has been of some use to you. It's a topic which I really enjoy talking about. because it's the value of solving societal problems with research involves all of us from different parts of the business doing lots of different things. It's not just about getting funding for research, it's about supporting the researchers to make it a lot easier that people can have the tools and technologies available to them to undertake the research in an effective and efficient way that leads to great outcomes, that helps us all with societal outcomes. So with that, I'll stop presenting, and that goes back to seeing you all. Thank you so much. And with that, are there any particular questions from today? Otherwise, if not, again, I'm available on email, or Priyanka is as well.
Any question from the participants? You can use the chat box to ask any question, or you just unmute the microphone to ask directly to Graham.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Abdurrahman Dahir, you have any questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. It's good to have you here for ELIS Fair. It's a very good one. As a student, just comment, is there any way from university UPM students for that ELIS Fair this year? Or as we all know, ELIS Fair is a good journal. It's a incredible one. So is there any waiver of ABC? Thank you very much.
Look, that's something that's always a challenge with, there's many different arms of Elsevier, as you can appreciate. I'm very much involved with the solutions part of the business, which is to do with the providing tools and solutions to institutions such as Pure and Digital Commons, as I made reference. Obviously, we have access to a lot of data. There's another part of the business that does a whole lot of analytical reporting, and a lot of that data is then can be summarized or brought together in tools such as Scopus and SciVal and things like that. And then there's the other side of the business, which is the journal business itself. And that's something that I'm not actually a part of. And I know that there's often a degree of contention between different arms of the business and the way they come together when it comes to the different views. I recognise that the cost of a lot of journals and journal subscriptions can be quite high. And your relevant contacts in Elsevier are actually here, which is a different group to what I'm in, I'll be honest to say, are available to you to actually provide you with some support and to answer your specific questions. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm more than happy to take up the cause on your behalf internally. And if you could just reach out to me direct via email, I'll come back to you in relation to that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We open to any other question if there is any other questions from the participants.
Well, it looks like I've either confused you all or I've provided enough information to you all at the moment. It could be either. And I thank you so much for your time. I hope that you found this session valuable. I appreciate the size of the audience. Okay, we've got one question there. Again, so what Digital Commons data does, we have the question around how do you reuse the data? And so having that available, it's really the first thing that Digital Commons data does is highlight the fact that that data set's available for various people. There's another sort of story which I touched on a little bit, which is about the importance of the metadata and capturing the data in the right way to ensure that it makes sense for reuse. Because sometimes if you don't tag it correctly or you don't cover off on a lot of those attributes, the reuse of the data can be quite limited. But I do see what we do see is if it's captured correctly and made available, it goes into Digital Commons. It's then cited by those other global indexing, including Google. And then as you're starting to search for various data around the world as it relates to a specific discipline or a specific project, or if you've found the data via the linked publication, which is always one of the best ways because you've got that summary of the research that's being conducted, then you can actually track and manage whether that data gets reused again. And we do see that data is being cited, and in some cases, data gets cited more than the research output itself. Which is really important. So in that sense, it's really important that the data is captured and made available publicly in that sense. So it gets recited a number of ways, but this Digital Commons data creates the platform for you to recite and reuse that data in the same discipline or adjacent disciplines.
Great. Any other questions, maybe?
Look, I think not at this stage. So look, I thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim, for the very interesting sharing for today. We'll proceed to the lucky draw session. As a token of appreciation for your participation today, the organizer are pleased to offer a Touch and Go e-wallet credit worth 10 ringgit to 6 lucky participants.
So I hope you're all opportunity. I hope we have some winners there, and I've really enjoyed spending this time with you today, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future where it seems appropriate. So, and thank you so much, and do enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Oh, here we go. Wait for it. Here we go. We've got the spinner wheel up.
Yes. Okay. So there's okay, go.
Right, tekan terus. Okay, let's see who is our first winner for today. Congratulations, Cik Amiruddin bin Cik Mansur, our first winner. Okay, let's see who's next. Congratulations, Miss Anis Shamimi binti Muhammad Darus. Okay, our third winner. Let's see who's the third winner for today. Congratulations to Miss Ng Yu N. Okay, we have 3 more winners. Right. Congratulations, Mr. Wan Kamaruzaman, Wan Mustafa. Congratulations, Tang Li Fong. Okay, let's see who is our last winner for today.
Dang, 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 dang.
Our final winner is Muhammad Syahmi bin Muhammad Asri. Congratulations to all the winners. We will contact you after this to share and send your winning prize. So again, congratulations. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much.
Okay, before we wrap up today's webinar, let us create a lasting memory by taking a virtual group photo. So we kindly request that everyone to turn on your camera if possible and share your brightest smile, everyone. Okay, take a moment and we take a few moments to ensure everyone is ready. Okay, right. Uh, okay. All right. Okay, let's count on together and 3, 2, 1, ready and smile. Okay, another one. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Really
Thank you. Bye-bye.
enjoy meeting with you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Remember next week, same Thursday next week, we also have another webinar for Open Science Mind. Do join us.
Okay, we will.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Benedict Onaza. Thank you for your participation. Right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay,
Bye-bye.
goodbye, everyone. Have a good day. Assalamualaikum.
Bye.
Siapa sebab buat